Thank you very much, Gerard. And can I first of all thank Ed and David for laying out their stalls with such lucidity and authority. And I found myself agreeing with a great deal, not everything, that they said. I knew tonight would be tough, but I didn't realise how tough until I started to look back at the positions that the TES has struck in the past. Because I always imagined that for a Tory, addressing a TES audience would be tough, but I didn't realise how tough. These are some of the radical positions that the editor of the TES has been striking recently. The results speak for themselves, says the TES, and the conclusion is inescapable. Poor kids cannot afford a non-traditional education. The most successful schools in challenging areas rightly expend a lot of energy building structure. They oblige pupils to stand when a teacher enters a class. They enforce uniform policies. They ban running in corridors. They establish competitive house systems, internal league tables, and setting. They use simple, practical steps to instill order and ambition that can be absent at home. There I am, outflanked on the right by the TES. But it's not just on tradition and order that the TES stands considerably further to the right than most members of my party.
This is about you, by the way.
I know.
Me, right.
On Sweden. Unfortunately for Labour, the TES says, Sweden's educational malaise seems to have precious little to do with the introduction of free schools. There's no evidence they've harmed performance, and it in fact is possible that the Swedish model might perform better in England than it does on its home turf. Then, not content with endorsing the Swedish model, it's also the case that the TES has argued for an end to national pay bargaining, saying it's hard to find a logical reason for its continuance. For the teaching unions, the idea that a colleague who has similar experience and identical qualifications, the idea that they should receive a bigger salary is inherently unfair. That, says the TES, is nonsense. And then finally, the TES has recently attacked the Tories for being too reticent on the role of the market in education. What is wrong with running a school for profit? The TES has argued. For many teaching professionals, Gerard went on to write, a for-profit provider in maintained schools is as welcome as a paedophile in Hamleys. This man will go far. One could argue, he goes on to say, that the involvement of the market in any shape or form in any public service is a mistake. That is a perfectly legitimate argument. But it is not one open to a Labour government that has used private providers to cut hospital waiting lists, to lock up its prisoners, and to recycle its rubbish. So, Gerard, I have to apologise. You have invited onto this panel 3 representatives of political parties, all of whom are significantly further to the left than the TES. It's a revolution that you've brought, not just to that title, but to the world of education. Now, in stressing the radicalism that you put forward, I want to emphasise that I'm a moderate in all sorts of ways. And I'm moderate when it comes to this motion, because I do recognise that there has been significant improvement in many schools over the last 10 years. Indeed, there's been significant improvement over many, many years. The literacy and numeracy strategies that David Blunkett and Michael Barber and others put in place saw an initial headline improvement in the quality of reading and writing in our schools. But the biggest improvement in reading and writing and numeracy had actually occurred in the preceding years under Gillian Shepherd, when she enacted policies which David Blunkett was wise enough not to tinker with too heavily. And the critical reason why I praise both David and Gillian is because the most important thing to do is not to compare ourselves endlessly with the past. Even a dyed-in-the-wool young fogey like me recognises that not everything in the past was better. The critical thing to do is to compare ourselves with the best and the rest. So when we look at educational standards in our schools, we should ask ourselves several tough questions. Yes, there's been improvement. But why hasn't that improvement been as fast and as consistent in other countries? Why is it, notwithstanding the welcome additional funding that we've seen over the last 13 years, why is it that we still have one of the most segregated and stratified school systems in the world? Why is it that the gulf between educational performance, between those children who are in private schools and those children who are in state schools, is wider in this country than in any other OECD country? And why, when we look at the OECD league tables, do we see Britain falling further and faster than some of its competitor countries? Now, my view is that if we want to improve education, and I believe passionately that both Ed and David do, why don't we look at those countries, and indeed why don't we look at those schools in our own country, which have produced superb, exceptional, fantastic, compellingly attractive results. Now, Ed was fascinating when he talked about the lesson that he observed in one school in Oxfordshire. I think I visited the same school. I think it was Banbury School, Dr. Fiona Hammond's school, which is a superb school. But one of the things that Fiona does, one of the things that all great schools do, is they recognise the critical importance of teachers and teaching. And one of the things that I've been most impressed by doing this job is the work of Michael Barber, McKinsey and others that reinforces the lesson that the best education systems in the world are those with the highest quality teachers. Nothing is more important than the quality of the interaction between the teacher and the pupil. And that is why I believe that we should work on a number of the good things that have been happening in education here and abroad, which have helped attract more and more talented people into the classroom. We should recognise and celebrate the success of Teach First in helping to raise the prestige and esteem of teaching overall. We should celebrate the fact, as Ed says, that there are a new generation of young people who are coming into teaching who are among the best qualified and the most enthusiastic ever. But we shouldn't rest on our laurels. We should ask ourselves, what do other countries do? Why is it they're more successful in Finland, in South Korea and in Singapore in attracting great teachers into the classroom? Why is it that so many potentially gifted teachers choose not to go into teaching as a result of what they perceive to be poor standards of discipline and behaviour? What can we do in order to give teachers and parents confidence that the highest standards of discipline and behaviour will be observed? What can we do in order to give teachers a greater degree of autonomy and professional respect so that they feel that they own the classroom, own their lesson plans, own the curriculum, own what happens in the environment which they lead? That is why I am so captivated by the success that other countries have had in allowing teachers to run schools. And the schools which inspire me most are the Knowledge is Power programme charter schools, which President Obama backs so enthusiastically, because they're run by teachers. They were started by two gifted young men, graduates of the Teach for America programme, who recognised that central and local bureaucracy could not provide them with what they wanted to do. Start their own school, start it in the ghetto, and give the very poorest children the very best start in life. And what I want to do is to ensure that that sort of idealism, which exists across the United Kingdom, is given a chance to flourish as fully and freely as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.